Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, coming to you from Catholics at the Shore, this amazing conference that's gathering together Catholic influencers, Catholic leaders in the sphere of, in this case, Catholic leadership and ministry, for the sake of drawing together a time of fellowship, a time of renewal, and a time of inspiration to keep changing the culture for the good and for Christ. Joining me right now is Sean Corcoran. He is one of the speakers here. He's the CEO of Men for Life. Men for Life is a national nonprofit dedicated to forming men in biblical masculinity and equipping them to protect life, support mothers, and strengthen families. He's a pro-life speaker, writer, podcast host, and he has a powerful testimony. Sean, thank you very much for making the time. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Marcus, for having me.
Well, I'm really glad to be able to speak with you. And I wanted to begin by just giving you the space to share your story, just especially for our listeners who don't know who you are.
Yeah. So, so if we go back to how did I get involved in Men for Life, right? That's usually the main question. Most people who are involved in the pro-life ministry have some reason that they were compelled to be in that. And so for me, it was as a college freshman, finding out that the young lady that I was dating at the time was pregnant, and she came in the dorm room and she said, "Hey, I'm pregnant," and in my mind, what that meant was, okay, there's a baby coming. Not woohoo, there's a baby coming, right? Like it wasn't something that I was prepared for,
Hmm.
but it was something that I understood what that meant, right? And so I understood that that meant that there was a baby coming, and so that's what I started working through both in my mind and verbally. And as I was working through that, she stopped me and she said, "Well, I'm not going to have the baby. I'm going to have an abortion." And keep in mind, this is 29 years ago. This is before the internet was really anything other than where you went to download music, like very slowly, right? Like the internet was not what it is today. There was no social media. There was no shouting your abortion. It was something that people did kind of secretly and in the shadows. And so I didn't know anybody that had ever had an abortion. I didn't know that it was something people actually did.
Hmm.
And so the best that I could do at that point was to say, no, we're not going to have an abortion, that we're going to have a baby. And that didn't work, and no matter what I said, it was clear that my opinion and my feelings didn't matter in that situation. And so, I'm very blessed. And I think this is an important part of my story throughout. I'm very blessed to have an amazing father. Um, and through all of my struggles, anytime that I got to a point where I wasn't sure what to do next, I knew that I could call him. And so I called my dad, and he drove 9 hours to where I was in school. He met with her mom. And my dad offered to adopt the baby. Like my parents did whatever they could do to kind of take the burden off of her. And it still didn't work. We lost that fight. And so after my child was killed in an abortion, the young lady started struggling with her grades just as much as I started struggling with my grades. And so she came to me one day and she said, "Hey, um, I met with this counselor. I explained what's happening. She helped me to waive my classes so that my grades wouldn't suffer and I could continue in school." And so I went and met with the exact same counselor the very next day. And I told her the exact same story. And I said, "Look, this is the young lady you met with. This is the situation, this is the resolution you came to, and I'm struggling as well, and I'm the other part of that." And she just said, "No, this does not affect you because you are a man." And so there I was left with the mother of my child telling me that nothing that I said or did or felt mattered. A school counselor who, if you think about it, at that point, as a 19-year-old young man, like that's a person in authority
Yeah.
telling me that it didn't affect me. Um, and it did affect me tremendously. And I ended up sitting in my dorm room for the rest of the semester, failing out of college. I moved home. I failed out of a second college two more times. And then I just began this life of just incredibly destructive behavior. Doing anything that I could to cover up the way that I felt inside. So, whether it was drinking is how it started, women, alcohol, drugs, and that just got worse and worse and worse over years to where 8 years after the abortion in 2005, I was overdosing in a hotel room at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, and waiting for the police to come and arrest me. And and keep in mind, I was told this didn't affect me. So there was nothing that I was able to connect with why I felt the way that I felt, that I was trying to cover it up. I just didn't like the way that I felt. And so I was doing everything I could to try to cover it up. And by the grace of God, I made it out of that hotel room. I made it into treatment the next day. Crazy story about getting to treatment in a truck that hadn't had an oil change or maintenance for 5 years. Broke down in the parking lot of the treatment center. I had to push the truck into a parking spot. And so that was God saying, "Hey, this is where you need to be. This is exactly where you will be safe." And so in treatment is where the counselor said, "Hey, we should talk about this abortion," and help me to connect, what I can now objectively look at and say, "Hey, everything was on an upward trajectory, and then the abortion happened and everything crashed. But while I was in it, because I was told this didn't affect me, and men are told all the time this doesn't affect them, that's not something that I recognized, and clearly that was the precipitating factor." And so that counselor helped me to work through that. She helped me to begin to heal. She gave me permission to mourn the loss of my child, to name my child. I have a son named Michael. To write letters asking for forgiveness, to write letters of forgiveness, and to really begin that healing process, which allowed me to heal from the addictions as well. I left treatment and I went back to college. I went to law school. And I started dating my wife, who I'd been asking out for 7 years. She said yes about 12 times and canceled on me every single time for 7 years until I think God finally helped me to become the man that she deserved, right? Like God was protecting everything that we have today from who I was at that time while he was building me into the man that she deserved. And so we started a family. I started a law firm. And the one thing they didn't tell me in counseling was that you're not the only man that's dealt with this.
Mhm.
And so I still held that really close. The only people that knew were my parents, that counselor in treatment, the mother of my child, and my wife. And then I was on a retreat. And on this retreat, this men's retreat, all these men were sharing all these stories of just these really vulnerable stories, right? Some of them were things they had done, some of them were things that had happened in their lives out of their control, but just really hard stories. And what I noticed was that there was no judgment. Like everybody was being met with grace. And it was just put on my heart that I could really finally unload everything and not have any fear. And so I did, and I shared my story of the abortion, of the addictions. I still had a lot of guilt about the inability to protect my child from being killed. And so like that was very hard for me. And when I shared that, it was very healing. But what was more powerful than that was that after I shared that story, I had 3 different men come up to me privately and say, "I've never told anybody this. 20 years, 30 years, but I lost my first child to abortion." And this happens every single time I speak. And sometimes it's men who fought against the abortion like I did. Sometimes it's men who pushed for the abortion. And it doesn't matter because it's met with at some point the understanding that I failed to protect my child. I failed in my masculine obligation to protect those entrusted to my protection, and with guilt and shame and regret, right? And so that's when I recognized that what God was calling me to do was to share my story, and I really thought that was it. Like I thought, share your story whenever you're asked.
We're going to have to pause there to take a break. I'm talking about Sean Corcoran. He is the CEO of Men for Life. He's one of the speakers at Catholics at the Shore, this amazing conference that allows Catholics to join together for a time of inspiration, fellowship, and to be re-inspired to re-engage the culture. We're continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter talking with Sean Corcoran, the CEO of Men for Life. Sean, we got interrupted by the break, but
Yeah,
you were just beginning to talk about how, so whenever you speak, men who've been holding this in for decades sometimes
yeah,
would come up to you and say, I've never told someone this. And so your willingness to say yes to God and to share this real wound in your soul that God has healed is helping others take a look at their own wounds.
that's right. And I think, a big reason that men don't talk about abortion is because men don't talk about abortion. And so whenever I share, it opens up the door for somebody to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not alone in this. And if I'm not alone in this, then I can share. And hopefully, they can feel comfortable sharing more broadly than just with me, because that could help someone else to know that they're not alone, right? I mean, there's 1.126 million abortions in America last year. That's 1.126 million fathers, but nobody's talking about those fathers. And those fathers aren't talking, and so that is part of the heart of where we're at with Men for Life. And getting to Men for Life was not something that I ever thought was going to happen. I had a great law career. I was doing really well. But it was taking me away from being a present husband and father, and I recognized that as being way more important. And so I made the decision to stop practicing. And shortly after I stopped practicing, Men for Life, the president of Men for Life started calling me and saying, "Hey, will you come run this organization?" And and I said no. There's zero chance that you are going to get me to run a nonprofit. I don't know how to do that. I can guess how much you want to pay me. I've got 5 kids. Like, this is not something that I'm going to be doing. And I said no for almost 2 years before God very clearly said, this is what you're going to do. And by the grace of God, they were still looking, and I was able to take that over. So I took over that role in August of 2024.
There's a lot of twists and turns that God has put you through. I want to ask you, for many of the men I encounter who had to make drastic, especially career shifts like this, one of the things they always tell me is, and my marriage has never been better, my family has never been better.
Yeah.
Can you please share about that?
Yeah. So uh, I would say that is a true statement, that yes, my marriage has never been better. My family has never been better. There's certainly a lot more spiritual attacks,
Yeah,
um, you
believe
know,
me, I understand that.
now than there were then.
Yeah.
Although I don't think that, now that I'm saying that out loud, I don't think that that's accurate. I think that then the spiritual attacks were longer and stronger, but not as sharp,
Hmm.
and separated, because it was more of the attack of, at that time, I'm making a ton of money, and that's what I thought I always wanted to do, and that's what I thought, so, and because of that, I'm providing for my family, so I'm doing the right thing,
Yeah.
right? So it's more of, spiritual attack in the sense that drawing out what seems to be good, but keeping me from what's great, right? From God, from what God's calling. So then just being filled with guilt and not understanding why. Now it's like sharp, but we call it out. We see it and we call it out, and so then the next time it comes in a different way, and it's unexpected, so to speak. I shared with you earlier that, and this is small, but I mean, let's be honest and call it what it is. That I went this morning to go visit a pregnancy center, and I plugged the address into the GPS, and it took me,
To the end of the world.
yeah, miles out of the way to a train track, and told me to turn right where there was no road. And it said there was a road, and it had the flag where I was supposed to be 150 yards to my right, and there was nothing there except forest and a train track. And so, it kept me from getting to where I was supposed to be at the time I was supposed to be there. And while that's not a big deal, like, it also doesn't make sense, and when things don't make sense, I think that it's okay to try to figure out, like, what's trying to keep me from this pregnancy center,
Yeah.
because that made me late for the pregnancy center, which unfortunately made me late for our appointment. And
Hmm.
so, things like that, just little things that just add up a lot, and one time I was about to walk on stage to speak at a pregnancy center banquet, and I got a picture of my daughter in the hospital with a broken arm, like distraction, and things like that. There was a period of time where every time I was about to get on an airplane, my wife and I would have these giant, like, knockdown, drag out fights about nothing, like about literally nothing. But they were just big fights and very like big emotions. And we finally recognized it. And we were like, we're never fighting about anything. We're just fighting. And it's always when I'm leaving. And it's not about us. And so it's distraction. And so once we started calling that out, I think it made us much closer. Once we started praying the rosary, as a family, I think that things have turned around. But as far as the rest of the family being closer, man, I get to bring my kids with me when I go speak. Typically, I bring my oldest son, and and sometimes I get to bring my oldest daughter. The three little kids, probably best for everyone if they don't show up at an event. But they'll get there, So I get that bonding experience with them, and if we have a sitter, I get to bring my wife. So we get to do things in a much different way. But there's still struggles. But God is so faithful, in the way that He is pouring into our family, in the way that everyone in our family recognizes the importance of this mission is amazing. And look, what I'm doing is pouring into men, raising up men. And I'm not a perfect man. And so I'm not a perfect husband. I'm not a perfect father. I try to be every day and I fail every day. But by calling men to action and saying, here are the specific steps that I expect or that you should expect of yourself, really, it's a reminder daily of the things that I need to be working on, which helps me to make progress every day in my own calling as a husband and a father. And so I think to your point that these things are this career change is helping me in that sense.
I want to pivot back to the core of the mission that you were just
Yeah.
touching on. In your work, it's very clear that you're also facing the onslaught of a culture that's telling men this isn't your fight. You have no
Yeah.
say in the matter. You and I were talking last night, and it's very clear, especially third wave feminism
Yeah.
has forced men to completely cede the moral argument on this matter.
That's right.
I invite your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think something that's really telling here is there's a Gallup poll from June of last year, and it found that 54% of men in America are pro-life, which was surprising. That
Hmm.
same poll found 38% of women in America are pro-life. So if 54% of men in America are pro-life, we should be winning this fight, right?
Hmm.
But to your point, men, even in the pro-life ideology or belief, can clearly identify this is not a women's issue. Like obviously, abortion is not a women's issue. Every abortion kills a child. Like abortion is murder, and so
And
it,
the child has a father and a mother
that's
and,
right.
and the dignity of its own life. So it's not just a woman issue.
No, it's not a women's issue at all. Like it's unfortunate that, and that's probably a whole nother conversation on all of the psychological issues and mental health issues that we get into when we start calling this a women's issue for women. And so, but even in pro-life, we have allowed it to be a women's fight, right? We have felt like kind of like you're saying, like, hey, who am I without over here without a uterus, right? Like to interject my opinion, and you are the man that God called you to be, and if you're going to be the man that God called you to be, you have an obligation to lead, right? And Men for Life is focused on restoring authentic masculinity. The only time I use the word authentic masculinity is in the mission statement. Everywhere else, I'm going to say biblical masculinity. And what I mean by that is to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve in a way that leaves a legacy that honors God.
Amen.
And we can go all the way back to the garden and see that first failure, right? Where Adam was with Eve while she's getting the same lies that women are getting today. You
And he
cannot
did
be good
absolutely
enough.
nothing.
You cannot be strong enough. You are not capable enough. You cannot be all that you were created to be unless you do the one thing God told you not to do. Unless you eat this fruit, you will never be the woman that you were made to be. Unless you have this abortion, you will never be the woman that you were created to be.
We're going to pause right there because we are coming up on another break. I'm talking with Sean Corcoran, CEO of Men for Life. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Sean Corcoran, CEO of Men for Life. Sean, it's a big part of what I preach too, and if you don't mind me just sharing a little bit,
Yeah.
the reason why this particular issue is so prevalent to me too is for the first 20 years of my life, I didn't live a Christian worldview, and so someone I loved, someone I knew and loved, he had a pregnancy scare with his girlfriend, and in my misplaced charity. I researched, so this was back when I was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I researched ways that his girlfriend could induce an abortion on herself so that they wouldn't have to go through with the pregnancy. Because I was one of the first people he called. I carried that with me for years, and I thank God for the gift of the sacraments. And so now, as a husband and father, and walking with the Lord for the past 16, 18 years now, and having lost five children of our own, this is not only a men's issue, this is an inherently men's issue. Because, like you mentioned earlier, it's not just that we don't have a uterus, therefore we don't have an opinion. We have the organs, so we don't have the organs of gestation, but we have the organs of conception,
Yeah.
right? So the biological argument is moot here.
Right.
The question is whether boys are rising up to be men, and men understanding that a big part of that is the sacrificial protective necessity in my role as a man. And so you were talking about Genesis, Genesis
Yeah.
chapter 3,
Yeah.
the fall. So let's pick up from there.
Yeah. So what I was getting at was that, while Satan's lying to Eve the same way that he lies to women today, Adam was standing right there. And we miss that so many times in the story unless we really read it.
Mhm.
And I encourage everyone to really read
Right. She turned and gave to her husband who was
yeah.
with her.
And so what that means is he's standing there silent and passive, watching and waiting, probably thinking her mouth, her choice, right? Her body, her choice. If she eats this fruit, the entire burden of this decision falls on her. If she has this abortion, the entire burden of this decision falls on her. And he let her take the entire burden. And at the end of the day, that's not how God works, right? Like God came looking for Adam, and God came to Adam and he said, "What did you do?" And he tried, right? He said, "Wait a minute, God, you gave me this woman and she gave me the fruit." And that's not how God works. He was very clear, like, this is on you. And if we have any doubt that original sin was not the product of the failure of woman, but the product of failure of masculinity, you go to Romans 5:12. And in Romans 5:12, it says, because of the sin of the first man,
Hmm.
not because of the sin of the first woman, not because of the sin of the first couple, because of the sin of the first man. And it continues, because of the sin of the first man, all men have sinned. And then it gets into, and it specifically says, even though the transgressions of every man is not the same as the transgressions of Adam, it's very clear all the way through the New Testament that it is because of the failure of man that we have original sin. And it's the same thing today with abortion. It is because of the silence and passivity of men that we have this state of abortion. Abortion today is the product of failed masculinity. Like that is, and I am ready and willing to defend that statement because that's where we are. And 53 years since Roe versus Wade, and we have a pro-life movement that has been run almost exclusively by women, right? And I want to be very clear in what I'm about to say. I am not blaming women for the fact that we have not solved abortion. I am blaming men for sitting out of the fight
Mm.
because what women have done is something that men never would have done had men been involved in, or had men led the pro-life movement for 53 years. The pregnancy center movement, 2,700 pregnancy centers just in this country. That's not the product of a man's imagination, right? Men would not have gone the compassionate route, and we need to serve these women. And I almost believe that the reason that everything has happened in the way that it has happened is because that foundation had to be laid. Because even when we end abortion, the pregnancy centers will be needed more because now we will have mothers who are not able to get abortions,
Hmm.
who will have nowhere else to turn. And so that foundation had to be laid in order for us to get there. But we can't be dismissive of the fact that the number of abortions today at 1.126 million for last year is only slightly higher, still higher than in 1975 when there were a million.
Yep.
Okay. And so the idea that we're winning, we shut down 50 Planned Parenthoods last year. We had just as many abortions as the year before. We stopped funding Planned Parenthood last year. Somehow they still got $832 million. They still did 434,500 abortions at Planned Parenthoods with us shutting them down. Like we're not winning this fight right now. We might be winning parts of it, but I think that it's important that we refocus. And I think that the only thing that has been missing from this equation that can be added that can help us to end abortion is masculinity.
I couldn't agree more. And like you've rightly mentioned too, the way a man is going to engage the fight is going to be vastly different than the way women do it. So pregnancy crisis centers, it's a very maternal thing to do.
Right.
And men are more directed. We're going to go down the path of legislation, the path of advocacy, the path of, in your case, talking about this, being very public about it. I want to invite you to speak to all of the men listening right now that boys don't become men overnight.
Yeah.
Testosterone kicks in, but that doesn't make a man. That's a tool that God has given the male body, so the man, for the sake of his work in strength and in service. But and even the natural aggression that testosterone creates, it's for the sake of service, like Christ flipping tables over. But it is incumbent upon men to be virtuous and to call out the man in their boys.
Yes. I think that's so important. And that gets to the heart of what Men for Life is working on. So to touch on that, on what I mean by that before I get to your question is that our main initiative, and we have three current initiatives, but our main initiative right now is a fatherhood program for the pregnancy centers. We know that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. We
Mm,
also know that the father is the number one influence in the mother's decision to choose abortion or to choose life. That's based on multiple studies polling both men and women. And so how do we reach those men? Your point is perfect because most of those men in today's society did not have a father,
yeah.
did not have a male role model, did not have any positive masculine role model. And so we need to provide that. Like we can't, I say all the time, like men have always looked at the next generation of men and thought, oh God, we have no chance, right? Like men came back from World War II and they looked at the next generation of boys and they're like, oh gosh, like we're doomed, right? And that can be like a silly comment, but it persists. And today the issue is that we have so much data on fatherlessness. We know the problem.
Yeah.
So if we as men are going to sit here and complain about how the next generation of men doesn't know how to be a man, like it's on us. Like get in there and fill that role. Like don't just sit around and complain about it. That's antithetical to masculinity.
Hmm.
Passivity, silence, complaining. Like we're here to fix this. So fix it. And the way we fix that in Men for Life is these fatherhood programs need mentors. These pregnancy centers need men to help raise up these men, and we're raising up men not to learn how to change a diaper, man. You can learn how to change a diaper on a baby while it's alive. You'll be fine. If you go through 2 or 3 diapers before you figure it out, everything's going to be okay. We want to help men to learn how to be a man,
Hmm.
right? Like, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to serve? What does it mean to live for something greater than yourself and to live for other people? That's where we get true fulfillment. What is your identity as a man? Because there's so much of this fake masculinity out there, right? And it's been super popular, and it's been super popular because at the time nobody else was speaking to it, and so they came in and filled a void, and thankfully somebody did, right? But what they filled it with was noise. What they filled it with was hedonism and self-serving masculinity. And the reality is that that's not real. It's fleeting because the idea that, make a lot of money, buy a Bugatti, and you'll get the woman you want is a lie. You make a lot of money, you get a Bugatti, you get the woman who wants that. You lose all that stuff, she's gone. And that means it wasn't real,
Hmm.
right? But if you live for other people, then you prepare yourself for someone to be worthy of someone who who God created for you. And I think that that's way more fulfilling, but we need to start at zero, man, and teach men how to be men, which is what your point was.
Well, you touched on so much. I would have loved to dive deeper into that historical reality that men came back from World War II. They saw the next generation not nearly as courageous and as sacrificial as they were, and so they just sort of gave up on the next generation. But and they encountered that because their fathers came back from World War One, and
Right.
so they picked themselves up by their bootstraps. But that doesn't mean that the moral formation of manhood is therefore moot. No, if anything, they need to pick up that slack. But we're down to the last minute of the segment. men are listening right now to this
Yeah.
program, and wives are listening to this program. What do you have to say to them, both in terms of the men rising up, but also for parents, in what ways can they exhort their boys to become real men and to take up the charge of this fight?
Yeah, I think that number one, your identity comes from the Lord. I think that you cannot have an identity of self. It comes from God. And if your identity comes from God, then I think that you can find, I mean, man, you can find all the answers in the Bible. You know, I mean, it says in Ephesians that the word is the sword, right? And so that is, we should, especially as Catholics, like that's one of my calls to Catholics is learn the Bible. I think it's a joke that we've all gotten too comfortable with to say, "Oh, I'm Catholic, so I don't know Scripture." Right? It's something that's funny, but it shouldn't be funny anymore. Like
Mhm.
that is the sword based on Scripture. We wrote the Bible. We should learn the Bible. And I think that's really important. But I mean, you look at Nehemiah. Nehemiah tells you where to find your calling, where to find purpose, and it gives you instruction on what it's going to feel like and how to get there. You know, you look at David and you know that, and I know we're running out of time and this is a long answer, but I think formation of boys starts with faith. And I think that it starts with honest and intentional contact and communication with dad or grandfather, if there's no dad, or some positive male role model. You know, it is important to mentor that young man, and so that's what that would be the easiest way to answer that question.
Sean, tremendous joy. I'm glad we've gotten to know each other. I'm looking forward to future conversations, especially on the things you're working on. Just draw attention to it. My guest has been Sean Corcoran. He's the CEO of Men for Life and a man who's deeply passionate about calling out virtuous manhood in men for the sake of especially the fight for life. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.